Okay, hi. Hi, everyone, and welcome to MindBoost. I'm your host, Britta, and I'm so glad you're tuning in today. At MindBoost, we know how vital mental health is to our joy, our relationships, our work, and our well being. We're passionate about the professionals who are doing this life changing work, whether they're grounded in traditional therapy or leading innovation to expand access and impact. What unites them all is this deep commitment to healing. And here we love learning from them, celebrating their work, and doing our part to support their mission. Today's episode is The Practice Rebel, and our guest is someone who has truly broken ground where few dare to tread. Nicholas, welcome. This is Nicholas Maio-Aether. Can I introduce you with all your
Sure.
credentials?
Yes, absolutely.
Nicholas is a board-certified behavior analyst, certified sexuality counselor, and the co-founder of Empowered, which is a center for sexuality. He's also the originator of, I think, 2 certification programs.
It's one with 2 levels, yes.
Okay. So one with 2 levels, certification programs in sexual behavior analysis. In short, Nicholas is the definition of a trailblazer in a field that is often overlooked, misunderstood, or just flat out avoided. Whether he's training ABA teens on compassionate, consent-based sexual behavior intervention, coaching persons with disabilities or neurodivergencies, or calling out ethical failures in his own field, Nicholas is here to change the narrative. And let me tell you, this conversation is going to change the way you think about behavioral health and sex therapy. Nicholas, I am so delighted that you could come here today. I mean, honestly, you totally stand out in this field. And you know that I have a brother who is different abled. So just as I was learning about your work, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so absolutely needed. And I have to know this guy. So thank you for being here.
No, thank you so much for having me, and what a lovely intro. I could not have introduced myself that well, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Nicholas, let's start at the beginning. What was the moment you realized the field of behavioral health and especially ABA wasn't addressing sexuality with the respect or the nuance that it deserves?
Well, yeah, I love that question. So I was already working in sexuality education. I was working prior to getting into mental and behavioral health at all. I was doing a lot of sex ed. And so when I was doing my practicum, actually, no, this was before my practicum even. So I had graduated with a master's in psychology, and I was just trying to find like what sites, what fields are going to be good. And disability sites were hiring. And I thought, I've volunteered for Special Olympics in the past. Like maybe this is something I could try. So I went and I was really, really, really disturbed by what I saw in special needs group homes, which is where I was working as a care advocate and a care assistant. And it was just awful. People, being denied any sort of access to adult materials or adult venues, people being denied access to adult types of touch, even when it was with another partner who indicated that they wanted that type of touch. And a lot of assumption and infantilization, thank you, where people are assuming that there is no sexual need or reason for these people to have a sex drive. And so anytime they're asking for any sort of thing aligned with sexuality, gender expression, sexual expression, that's looked at as problem behavior by the systems that they're in. And then they want that squashed and quelled so that they can focus more on things like finger painting. But I'm just like, no, like these are adults and it's okay if they want to finger paint, but it's also okay if they want to finger someone else. It's like a
Right.
completely different angle, as long as they are able to consent. Oh, my dog has
Yes.
just joined me. I'm going to real quick shut
Love
this
it.
door in one moment. Right. Yeah, it's sad because this is something that at first I thought was one agency. I was like, okay, this is just how it is there. This agency's horrible. And then as I moved on, I found a better agency, but still found similar issues occurring. And then as I expanded more and more, I found out this was a huge systemic issue. It's pervasive and it's across almost all settings with disability.
Yes, I definitely can see that. Wow. You and your co-founder created Empowered nearly a decade ago. What was the original mission and what surprised you about how that vision has evolved?
Our mission has really stayed the same.
Okay.
So our mission has been always to create a space, a center, kind of where all intersections could come and receive equitable access to sexuality education, sexuality related therapies, and sexual opportunity. And this is a place that we really value, that we're able to address people from various walks of life, various ability levels. A lot of people, when they think of an ABA agency, they assume that this agency only works with disability, and oftentimes they assume only autism. We work across the disability spectrum, but also we work with neurotypical individuals, because it's our belief that everyone's a human, that sexuality is ingrained as part of being a human, and that sexual expression is a human right. So we want to be that place where it doesn't matter what your background is. If you need help, we can help you.
Wow, that is so great. Looking back, what were some of the earliest walls you hit as a professional trying to talk openly about sex, consent, and neurodiversity?
Yes. So I started all of this in 2011. I started my actual foray into behavior analysis in 2012, but 2011 was when I was just wanting to do sex ed in disability setting. Sorry. So early issues that I had when I was initially calling stuff out, the first agency that I was calling stuff out at, they found ways to try and make me look like the bad guy in everything that was happening. And eventually it just looked like I was like a liar or falsifying things, because anytime I would report something, they had somebody at the higher up agencies, right? At the state level, someone was letting them know, because whenever someone would come to check, everything was always fixed and working in a much better way. And then it would go right back to normal as soon as that person would leave. So I kept getting in trouble for lying, whistleblowing, falsely, whatever. So that was not fun. That agency actually tried to punish me immensely. They knew that I had HIV, and so they placed me specifically with a caseload of nothing but clients who bit. And they told me that if I gave my clients HIV, that was on me. And that was their way of getting me to quit.
Oh my gosh.
So again, you want to talk about some sex negativity in disability. They were willing to put their clients at risk of HIV just to prove a point to me. Yes. So there are some horrible things that happen. And that was an ABA agency that was also serving group homes. So, when people say that ABA can be abusive, I don't disagree there. I do disagree with the notion that all ABA is abusive, but I definitely do see where it has played out that way. Something that I will also highlight is like when I did move into the next agency, where they were like, oh my gosh, you can do the sex stuff. Like, it was a complete flip of the switch.
Yeah.
They were excited. They gave me clients, they gave me caseload, they helped me connect systemically across the agency to make change. And so that was huge. And also, they were like, don't tell anybody what you're doing. Don't tell anybody that we're giving you these opportunities, right? It was still very secret, even though they were like affirming me. There was still this level of like, the rest of the world won't, so we've got to keep it quiet. And things started getting out more and more, because some of the clients we were serving were also in school systems and things like that. And so I had to assist at the school or something like that. And then the school was suddenly aware that I could do this work. And so as it was starting to branch out and grow, we had a school that actually reached out and asked me to do an intervention for a young man. And his father found out that I was gay and had been doing sex ed for years, and found out that I had also worked for Hustler for a bit. And so this, not as a star by any way. I was not in any films or anything. I was writing reviews on adult novelties. That's what I was doing, and I was helping co-manage or assistant manage a store. But he found out my history, and it was not the history of most ABA providers. And then he also found out that obviously I'm here to address the sexual behavior his son was engaging in, and his son was engaging in a lot of anal play. And when I recommended a way to fade anal stimulation out, instead of just saying no, because no wasn't working. They brought me in because no wasn't working.
Yeah.
But when I had this plan, he went ahead and reported me to the insurance panels. He reported me to the board. He reported me to the licensing committee. And I was terrified. I was only 1 year certified. I was still relatively new in my career. I was absolutely terrified that this guy was going to take me down and I was going to end up working at Burger King. And I was amazed, because my board stood up for me. The insurance company stood up for me, and the school stood up for me. and the dad lost his case. I did not end up getting to intervene on the individual because he was guardian. So obviously, he still pulled his son. But just that thing where I went from don't tell anybody, no one will support you, to actually people are pretty jazzed that this is happening.
Yeah.
Was really a huge flip of the switch for me. And so at that point, I started spreading the word and I started planning to open my own company.
Okay, that is an amazing story. Gosh. So, Nicholas, you are literally the embodiment of the practice rebel, not just in name, but also the way you have challenged outdated models and carved your own path. Have you always seen yourself this way?
I've always seen myself as stubborn and tenacious. I think that, I disagree with the notion of like autism as a superpower because I have my deficits and I have my issues. And also, being autistic, I do see things a little bit differently than maybe the average neurotypical person would. And something that I think has served me some benefit is oddly not being rigid, but going completely the opposite. So instead of under generalizing, almost over generalizing, but I can see expansive ways that things connect. I can see that Venn diagram, that overlap. And I like to play in that overlap space when there are rules at play, because that overlapped space is where we can be flexible. I started really looking at behavior analysis, at my training in psychotherapy. I'm trained classical, through psychology. I got 1 degree master's there. Also got a master's in marriage and family therapy. I've completed practicums. But as I was doing psychotherapy, and I already had my kind of background in ABA too, I started realizing there are areas where these overlap, and there are things that I can do within behavior analysis that can bring in affirming care, that can bring in a trauma-informed approach, that can be more whole person centered than pinpointed on a specific behavioral set, because a whole person is a buildup of many repertoires of behavior. I also learned a lot as I started moving through on the behavior analysis side and the psychotherapy side. There's a modality called ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. And it actually came from a behavior analytic theory, but is very common in psychotherapy. And so you can find programs for it for behavior analysts or for psychotherapists. So it's like, where's that overlap, right? Where's the part that we can both do? There's things that I can't do that in my licensure that a psychotherapist can, such as unpacking, going deep into trauma, going deep into the mind, going into and exploring dreams. That's way out of my scope as a behavior analyst. And also behavior analysts who only know point here, touch that, first, then. That's really basic, y'all. So how can we kind of come in and find that bridge where science meets art, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that really stood out to me. And again, I get very caught up in words and verbiage. I think that's me being autistic, but most behavior analysts have a master of science. Most psychotherapists have a master of art. There is an art to delivery that behavior analysts are not taught. And so it's getting in there and being more human in how you deliver and viewing your person as a whole-bodied human instead of a repertoire of specific behavior, I think is really, really helpful, and has been really influential in how I've developed my practice. So my practice is very ACT heavy. We do a lot of acceptance and commitment. And the point of that is to teach people to control their own behavior in response to discomforts so that they can move forward in ways they would value and can better their lives without having to be controlled by others.
Yes.
I do not like ABA that is environmental control on a person, and that is the end all be all of it. If there needs to be environmental manipulation, which is a big part of ABA, it should be something where the individual is aware of it, where the individual is aware of how this can help them, and where eventually that can be faded out because the individual has built out the skills to not need any further environmental manipulations. I want to real quick also highlight that phrase because, again, when we're talking about something that can be used abusively like ABA, we need to address verbiage, and manipulation is a word that has very specific feels tied to it for a lot of people. So I want to highlight that environmental manipulation does not mean that we are manipulating a person through their environment. It means that we're looking at it very scientifically. Anytime you adjust or change a variable, you call that a manipulation. And so we're calling everything in the environment variables. So for instance, if I have a person he's trying to learn to be more empathetic, okay? He's trying trying to make a better choice for a boyfriend. That's his goal. And, he's only been going up and sharing kind of his perspective or what's been going on in his mind. And so he's trying to practice asking questions to girls. My environmental manipulation is going to be to make sure that there are some girls in his environment who will have a conversation with him as long as he's within somewhat of a normed bound, as long as he's not coming in and just immediately talking about their breasts, which he might be attracted to. Is he coming in and having a conversation that's not about her breasts, right? So and if he does, is she rewarding that? We call that reinforcing, but is she following through and making that a positive thing for him so that he is more likely now to see that he did right and to keep going and to feel good about himself and about this process. So that's environmental manipulation, is sometimes working with the people in the environment and saying, hey, this person's trying. Why don't you reward them for their efforts? And we see environmental manipulation outside of ABA all of the time, right? You can even look at any school system, and realistically, ABA is kind of worked into school systems in different ways, but we're trying to motivate people and we're trying to make sure that they access rewards. People use things like stickers and token economies and things to work up to stuff that came from ABA. So there's a lot of things that that this can be, that can be beautiful and affirming and rewarding, and doesn't have to be, a single term contingency, first this, then that. Doesn't have to be based in edible reinforcers or things that I think a lot of people mentally envision when they think of ABA.
That is so just wonderful. Just having grown up with my brother, and we definitely, now that I'm talking with you, did things wrong. We were very much like the trying to keep him just like a child, and he would write letters to women that he thought were beautiful, and we just kind of I don't really know what to do with this. But I just, wow, this is so needed. And I'm I wish you or someone like you had been in our lives back then for him.
I appreciate you. And I also want to highlight that you're not alone in that. So many families out there are doing their best. And that's something that I always try and highlight when I get in there, is I'm not here to tell you, oh, you've been doing these things wrong. It's okay. You've been trying your best. Now I have these skills. Since you have the motivation, let's make this work.
Absolutely. Gosh, that's so great. What do you wish more providers understood about the cost of staying quiet or coloring inside the lines?
There's going to be potentially opportunity cost. You're not going to get to know what all you're potentially capable of. Your clients are not going to get potentially the most that you could give them. They're going to get the most of whatever you're trained in. But if you realize that you want to kind of break down walls and you want to get training from outside areas, my biggest thing about being quiet is that if you're quiet, you can keep going status quo, but you're not going to make change. And if your goal is to disrupt, if your goal is to make change, if your goal is to generate something new, something positive, you've got to speak up. But also, it doesn't necessarily have to be vocal speaking up. Sometimes speaking up looks like modeling and just ensuring that the people around you can see that you're doing it differently.
Yes.
Being quiet and not letting people see what you're doing is also a problem. And that's why I was so glad when I didn't have to hide in my little bubble. Because again, once people could see that this work was happening and they could see that clients were having outcomes, then they started wanting this service. And I think that another issue with staying quiet is that when you stay quiet, you often stay inside your box, and your box is going to include the people who trained you, like your supervisor when you went into your practicum, those kinds of things. But they have limited knowledge. All humans do. And if you're quiet and you stay in your little circle or your little box, then you're not learning from the wealth of knowledge that's outside of that. And so the more that we speak up and the more we speak out, the more we can find other individuals who we can learn and grow either alongside or from. And I think that that's really big. When I was first coming out about a lot of the work that I'm doing, and that I'm doing ABA with couples, and that I'm addressing sexuality as an alternative to sex therapy through sexual behavior analysis, there were a lot of people who were very upset, both in the ABA community and the psychotherapy community, telling me that what I was doing was wrong, that I was basically stepping on people's toes. I'm the bylaws chair at ASECT, the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. They know what I'm doing and they don't have an issue. The board, I'm board certified under 2 different behavior analyst boards. They both know what I'm doing. They don't have an issue. And as I got out there and really started showing people what I'm doing, people stopped having the issue and more people started buying in. And then we ended up creating a certification for it. But again, I had to speak up and I had to be able, this I think is also important. If you're going to speak up, you need to be able to speak common tongue. You need to be able to speak a language everybody can understand. And so to me, it's really important to talk across provider types, right? I want to know what the social workers know. I want to know what the marriage and family therapists know, what the PsyDs know. I want to know the different angles that they're taking, the language and the verbiage that they're using, because I can show them in terms they can understand how what I'm doing is actually different. And I can show them where it can overlap or mesh if we need to do side-by-side treatment, wraparound care, things like that. But I wouldn't have had those skills, the ability to defend my practice if I did not have that language. And part of that came from wanting to know. And so I really recommend, if you are going to disrupt, if you're going to try and break down walls, think about who those walls are holding back and that those people are going to want their status quo because change is uncomfortable. And if you're going to be part of the change, you've got to be able to help them navigate that discomfort, or they're going to try to shut you down so that they don't have to deal with discomfort.
Yes. Gosh, thank you. How do you personally manage the emotional load of being a disruptor in a field that isn't ready for what you're saying sometimes?
There have been times where it was really hard. I've been called out by the autistic community for being a behavior analyst in general. There's a huge conflation, and it sucks because this movement in which autistic voices are finally being heard in ABA. I'm so grateful for it. And I'm so glad that behavior analysis that is focused specifically on autism, which is about 78% of behavior analysts focus in autism. The other 22% are across like 7 or 8 other subfields, including sexual. So I'm not considered autism focused. I'm considered sexual. But that autism focused model where they're trying to treat the core deficits of autism, there's a conflation that is ABA, that is all of ABA, that if you're not doing that, it's not ABA. And I really want to just highlight for a moment that model was not even one of the earlier ABA models. It was developed in the 90s, and ABA was developed in the 50s and 60s. So, like, again, we have a lot of people say that Lavos is the father of ABA because he created this model that gets used so much. Lavos was not there at the inception of ABA. He's not the father of ABA, and I would never have joined a field that he was the father of, because he is the father of conversion therapy, and I'm a queer. I would definitely never have joined that. Do I recognize that he had heavy influence in that sector? Absolutely. Do I recognize that sector has a lot of issues? Yes. And so I try to speak up a lot for that. Yeah. But I think it's really, really important to know our history, to not be too black and white, because people will sometimes say, all ABA is abuse. Well, that's not factually correct.
Yes.
They'll say, well, it's because all ABA is based in a model developed by Lavos. That's also factually incorrect. At the same time, this is incredibly important to address. His model is an incredibly pervasive model, and it does cause, for some individuals, PTSD and other negative outcomes. So we do need that conversation to happen, but the conversation needs to happen based entirely in fact. Yes. And it's also super ignorant for any behavior analyst to say ABA is not abuse because they haven't witnessed it. They need to know their history and recognize there's been a lot of abuse.
Yes.
But ABA at the end of the day is just a science of human behavior. In the emotional toll, what has happened to me is that I have had the autistic community come after me saying that, I'm basically, I don't want to use the language that they've used against me. Basically a bad person, a hypocrite, that I must be lying because I say, oh, well, I don't treat the core deficits of autism. I help couples like ejaculate more and have, better orgasms or actually have sex when they've been petering out and not having it. They're like, well, no, you're gaslighting us, you're lying. So I think it's really, that's been hard for me.
Yes.
And I have to sit there and I have to remind myself that I'm autistic. I can get caught in boxes. And I think that a lot of these people who are arguing against me are caught in boxes, sometimes fueled by this misinformation that all of ABA is this. And if that's what they're getting and they're getting it from lots and lots of sources, it looks like truth to them. And so I have to remind myself that even though they're doubling down on factually incorrect information and telling me I'm gaslighting for telling them the truth, this is their truth. It's not an empirically factual truth, but it is something that it holds a lot of meaning to them. And the way that they're kind of coming at me or being intense is a reflection of how they feel about that truth, which is, again, an internal truth, not an empirical fact, not a reflection of me or my practice. And so I've really had to learn to let that go. I try and advocate a couple of times. I'll try and have a couple of back and forths, but if it's getting nasty, I've just learned to go, you know what? This is not a reflection of me. This is a reflection of that issue, which I have
Yeah.
not fed. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to back away. And I'm going to continue to advocate for those individuals, even if they attack me. And that's going to help me feel good too, because I know that eventually we'll get to a point where there's less reason for them to attack me.
Gosh, I'm so sorry. I just want to say that. And I mean, you're so needed. You're like a diamond in the rough. Nobody wanted to touch this. And it was so absolutely needed. I mean, every person who is different abled in some way, shape, or form needs what you're doing. And people don't know how or why. And we've all been terrified. So I'm so sorry.
No,
It's been so hard, but also you're just incredible. Gosh.
Thank you.
See, you built the only, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you built the only SBA training program specifically for behavior analysis. Yeah.
Yep.
Or
Yep.
for analyst. Yeah.
So it's the only sexological program for behavior analysts. And so it is, our subfield is sexual behavior analysis, and it's the only training program that is comprehensive for the subfield, yes.
So what makes sexual behavior analysis different from just traditional sex therapy?
I love this question. We focus entirely in behavior. We do not go into the mind. There's no diving in. If that's needed, and I recognize that there's validity to that. This is another area where like behavior analysts and psychotherapists sometimes butt heads thinking one's better than the other. And I've had my experience delivering both and working under both. And at the end of the day, I think that they both have their place. And so there are times where I'm like, they'll come in, and if they're not highly motivated, if they're not somebody who I think is going to move forward behaviorally, there's stuff that they're getting stuck in that's just too much. They're having trauma responses that they're reporting, never to my therapy, that they're reporting, those kinds of things. I'm going to actually refer them, even an assessment, out to a psychotherapist. If they're coming to me and they're wanting, to work on something like very specific behaviorally, like I'm not approaching my partner, and I want to be approaching my partner. My partner's feeling really bad that I'm never approaching, or I'm unable to have comfortable sex. On the disability side, especially the more profoundly impacted folks, people who are in supported care, a lot of them are coming to me because they want to try flirting and they've been getting in trouble for harassing, or they want to explore gender and their system is not allowing them to, or is considering it problem behavior when they're wearing clothes that are not of the gender that they were assigned at birth. And so in any of these cases, I don't have to go deep into the mind. I go, okay, like what are we going to do behaviorally? How can we change these things? One of the things I know when it comes to this more quote unquote sexual dysfunction, this is another area where we differ. In behavior analysis, it's in our school that all behavior serves a function. So we do not assess for and diagnose dysfunction. That's only on the psychotherapy or the medical side. And so in our side, we say, okay, all behavior serves a function. So you have vaginismus, you're clamping up, you can't be penetrated comfortably. Then let's work on what this is serving you. This is a protective element. Why is it protecting you? Right? And so we start looking at environmental things that we can do to help you feel safer. So your husband has not been sharing what's on his mind when he comes home from work. He broods in the other room and then comes in and kind of demands sex, and you have no idea what's on his mind, and it feels weird, and you don't know if you're just there for that. Well, then thank you for sharing all of this. It sounds like you're being punished a lot in your efforts, and that when he comes in and tries to do this, your body is shutting down to protect you, and it's punishing him, right? And so we start talking about all of these things are environmental things that are either reinforcing or punishing behaviors, and how we can move forward and change some stuff, right? In that case, all right, start talking to your wife, right? Start talking to your wife. That's an environmental manipulation. It'll help her. Over here in the disability side, we might do things like, for building up flirting versus harassment skills, we might watch videos, break it down. Are they flirting? Are they harassing? How did we know? We, for some individuals, we'll break it down even further. We have a program on facial and body language. We call it the Subtle Clues program. So most of our clients can recognize happy, mad, sad, but you got to know more than that if you're getting into flirting and stuff like that. So we start teaching about things like, if someone looks like they're pleading with their eyes and they're just kind of like, but they're not smiling or frowning. They're not mad, but they're looking like they want out. So we teach our clients that means stop. You do not have consent to keep going, right? So teaching our clients these things, and we teach them that flirting does not have to be a specific script. A lot of our clients, again, especially if they're autistic, can get caught up in boxes. And so we try not to make flirting a script. You don't go up to everybody and say, hi, like your hair, right? What happens if you go up to somebody and they're bald, right? Or you go up to somebody and they're really, really self-conscious about their hair. Just certain things. You can't use the same thing with everybody. Also, complimenting somebody on a physical attribute doesn't go over very well for a lot of people. So so we have to think about these things, right? So I always try and teach flirting as anything that is casual, consensual, and enjoyable, which means that we really need to work on perspective taking. You need to be able to tell if this is casual, consensual, and enjoyable for the other party. So those kinds of things, just building those skills. And so we'll do role plays, we'll do written scenarios, all of the things. And then we even have a Dungeons and Dragons game called Sex Ed D&D, where they go through 7 different adventures and they get to practice with other clients and with staff. They get to practice a whole bunch of different things, including flirting in the bar or tavern. It's a tavern, of course, it's D&D. So they go into the tavern and the barmaids are there. And then there's also a union of ship makers and woodworkers, the carpenters union. There we go. And so there's men that they can flirt with. There's women they can flirt with. There's a non-binary entity there called Chronos. That's a clock that came to life that they can talk to. They have the ability to flirt with whoever they would want, whoever they go to flirt with. One of our staff will don the character, and then they can back and forth and practice the flirt. And then if it ever gets to a point where it's getting a little too flirty, a little too successful in there, we pause and we say, and then they kissed, right? We just kind of pause it there and pause. Okay, this is what happened. And then gameplay continues after that, those types of things. But just really building up those skills and being able to not just, this is the area where I think behavior analysis does differ a lot from psychotherapy, is that we're very big on the proof being in the pudding. We need data. We need to see it. If, for instance, I'm working with a couple and they're working on orgasms, I don't want to see that. Okay. That'll be a little bit different. When we're building up a skill, I definitely want to see that skill is building so that I can help fine tune it and get it as built as possible. When it comes over to something where the skill is incredibly private that they're building, or even in the disability sector, we've done work helping people have more effective solo sex because they're spending sometimes hours a day trying to stimulate themselves without achieving any sort of orgasm. And so, that kind of up down of an arousal cycle where they're never getting down to the baseline and they're just constantly feeling quote unquote blue balls. It's that's rough. So getting in there and helping with that, either case, there's a level at which the instruction becomes so private that I don't want to see.
Yes.
And so in disability, this is where a guardian needs to be involved, and the guardian is going to do that final kind of step. And we're also going to work with the guardian on how to maintain client dignity and the guardian's own dignity as they go through that. get to a point where the client is completely solo. And then and the reason we use a guardian is because we want to cut down on potential for abuse. We don't want
Yes.
clinicians or staff ever involved in sexual activity for clients with profound disabilities, because it teaches a very weird lesson that clinicians or staff can be part of your sex. Over on the other side, we're using data that's coming from both partners. And so we use what's called inter-observer agreement, IOA. And so we check and we make sure that their data lines up. So if one partner A says that they had sex 3 times and 2 times it resulted in orgasms for both partners, but partner B says they had sex 4 times and orgasms resulted in the 2 of those times. Then we come in and we say, okay, so you agreed on your orgasms, but you disagreed on how many times you had sex. What's going on with that? So we start talking about that. Like, why are you reporting differently? Is this, was there a misunderstanding? Did you forget to document it? That's okay. But oftentimes it comes down to, what is sex?
Yes.
Right? What is sex? What am I counting as sex? What am I considering a quality, intimate experience? And so a lot of times, because we recognize anxieties are at the heart of most quote unquote dysfunctions in sexuality, we work really hard to build that sense of trust, that sense of safety, and to kind of just give them that freedom to explore sex being whatever you would want it to be, as long as you're with your trusted and safe person. So I've actually sent couples home where their sex for the week was to try and find something creative to do that made them feel naughty, no matter what that was. I want you to find something creative to do. It's got to be legal. You're going to do this at home, but it's got to feel naughty, whatever it is, because they wanted that spice back. And when we're talking about when's the last time you felt that spice, they're talking about when they snuck out as teenagers. I'm like, okay, so you liked naughty. Naughty was your spice. So let's bring some of that back. And so a rule in their home was a standard rule. They had already raised their kids. Their kids had already left the house. So they had like established their rules and everything for a household. You were not allowed to eat in bed. So they came back and they had eaten Oreos in bed, and it was so naughty, and they felt really connected over it, and they had an intimate experience. So their next homework assignment was to go ahead and full on make a pillow fort. I wanted them to make a pillow fort, get a whole pack of double stuffed Oreos. You're going to watch some movies or whatever you want in the pillow fort, and you're going to just act like mom and dad are outside and don't know that you guys have Oreos in there. They ended up having really, and this again, I'm not there. This is based in a couple's report that aligned, but they both reported they had really good sex that day. So they both reported sex. They both reported that it was positive, that it was a good experience, no orgasm, right? And I was like, yes, because you don't need an orgasm to have a positive sexual experience with your partner. And now the pressure of trying to constantly make your partner orgasm so that you can consider it sex is gone. So now let's start going back into what happens if you have penetrative intercourse. And lo and behold, it's working.
This is amazing. Gosh, I feel like I'm having a therapy session. Like, I'm taking note.
But again, I don't have to go deep into the mind. I'm just like, okay, what is the stimulus, right? What is it that you feel when you feel horny, right? And those are internal, but they're not in the mind. These are physiological, which is an environment, right? Your internal world. So they're describing physiological sensations. And if those are aligned with arousal, they're oftentimes also aligned with anxiety, helping them start to take advantage of the moment that those sensations are present. That's a behavioral response to an environmental stimulus. That's what we start doing. We don't go breaking into, why do you feel naughty, right? Like, I don't try to figure that out. And if that is something that they want to figure out, okay, I'm going to refer you over to a psychotherapist. I can't unpack or figure stuff out. That's not my spot, unless you have an incredibly clear behavioral history where we can pinpoint the incident, but that's rare.
Yeah.
So we usually say, if you don't have a reason to need to unpack, you just want to move forward, then we're probably a good fit.
That is so good. Okay, so I'm going to ask, what are you seeing as the biggest gaps in clinical education when it comes to sexuality and consent?
I would say that the average clinician does not know much about consent versus assent, and how assent should still be respected even if consent is the only thing in your ethics code, because just because the parent or the guardian has consented to something doesn't mean that this individual that you're working with is okay with it. And so we should be paying attention to their body language, their vocal language if they have it. We should be paying attention to any signs that they're okay with this or that they're not okay with this. And we should be backing up if they're not okay with this and trying to find a way to help them feel safe as we move forward. I think that we're seeing a huge shift in ABA, again, because of the voices of actually autistic folk who have spoken up. And it's beautiful to see this shift happening in ABA where we're seeing more assent-based practices starting to happen. We're seeing a lot less of a focus on masking or trying to act neurotypical in ABA. So I'm glad to see that. But I still run into an issue where I get referrals from sex therapists, not because necessarily they wanted to just give me a referral, but because they feel like they cannot do what I can do in regard to disability. And I think that's an area of clinical training that needs to happen more, is I think more standard clinicians, especially psychotherapists, need to be trained in disability and how to deliver even psychotherapy to somebody with a limited vocal repertoire or somebody who cannot think abstractly. That's one of the main reasons that we get referrals from a psychotherapist. They're like, I've been trying, this guy cannot pick up metaphors and I don't know how to work with it. And I'm like, okay, well, not all therapy has to be through metaphors, right? Like there's different ways that we could approach these things. And so learning to diversify a skill set across populations, I think is something that more clinicians need and is a strength behavior analysts do have, because what we are trained in, again, is the science more than the art. If we get trained really, really heavily in the science of generalization, we get trained really heavily in the science of efficacy. And so how to take something and effectively apply it so that it can generalize into a skill, that's what we do. We break tasks down, we figure stuff out. And so I think that if we could learn in the ABA side more of the art, but also if clinicians on the other side could learn more about sort of the science of breaking things down, not everything in ABA, they don't need to know all the science of ABA, but the science of breaking things down, creating what we call task analyses, or what we call an alternating or changing criterion design. So, especially if you have an ascending changing criterion design. So my goal is here, right? And that goal is really, really high. So I'm going to spread that goal out and I'm going to have sub goals, right? And those sub goals are going to help me build the skills that are needed to actually achieve this goal. And because I have sub goals that I'm achieving over time, I can feel good about my progress as I get there, instead of just repeatedly trying for this and beating myself up for why I'm not getting there. And so I think that that is one of the areas where more clinicians could benefit from being able to do that, especially when we need to break things down very specifically for clients with disabilities.
Yes. Thank you. Well, we are coming to an end. This has been so fabulous. I have one last question. What advice would you have for other rebels in the making who feel stuck outside or inside an outdated system, but know there's a better way?
You're going to have to give me a second on this. You might have to edit it. Can you ask it one more time?
Yeah. What advice do you have for other rebels in the making who feel stuck inside outdated systems, but know there's a better way?
Okay. I think first, know your laws, know what your limits are in terms of your scope, because we do have them. Earlier, I said I don't delve into the mind. I have my limits in my scope. So I think knowing the limits of your scope, and then again, a lot of things in life are not boxes, they're Venn diagrams. So if your scope is here and someone else's scope is here, where do they overlap? And if they overlap, what can you borrow from that to enhance yours? But you have to make sure that you are really aware of your scope. That is something that in my training program, I'm very, 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 very rigid with my staff on, or not my staff, my students on, is this notion that over and over and over, you should be asking yourself, is this behavior analysis? When I go to do something, can this be worked into behavior analysis? And for our framework, it's very simple. Anything that falls within kind of two categories, we call it get a cab, and then the 6 assumptions of science. If it fits those categories, I know it can be in my scope. So it makes it very, very easy for me then to say, okay, what can I grab? Right?
Yes.
So if you're a social worker or a personal counselor or a marriage and family therapist or a clinical psychologist, actually, if you're a clinical psychologist, all of this can fall under your scope with the right training. But anybody else, you're going to have more of a limited scope. And again, it's going to come down to your training to some degree, right? Like if you're not trained in something, it's definitely not in scope. But getting that training for anything that can be worked into scope, I think is important. I think it's also important to find other disruptors, right? Find other people who are doing similar work in your field. You know, there are people in the ABA field who are speaking up about inequities regarding the just numbers of behavior analysts who are white versus people of color, right? And speaking up about trying to make sure that we have more opportunities for people of color. And from that, we have ended up with Black men in behavior analysis, Black women in behavior analysis appreciation day, and all of these things are starting to come up, and people are able to come out and do more. And again, it's just about knowing who else is out there, what they're doing, and connecting with them, raising that voice. I think earlier you had asked, Britta, if, you know, the cost of being quiet, right? So something I want to just highlight is that we can reduce that cost for everybody by platforming other people's voices. If we see other disruptors and we agree with what they're saying, platform them. And oftentimes, as long as they agree with what you're saying, they'll platform you back. And so that's something that I think is important, is if you're part of a movement, other people, if their movement is aligned with yours, are very likely to support yours as long as they see you're supporting theirs.
Yes. Gosh, thank you for that. Nicholas, if there's someone listening who's interested to know more about the certification, the classes that you've created, things like this, how can they find more information on the things that you've been working on?
The absolute easiest way, I try and keep things as simple as possible, would just be to go to my website, empoweredcenter.com. We have a tab there about certification. It's got a button down at the bottom. You can click and it'll take you through to the full certification page, which has all sorts of downloads and stuff like that. If you want to reach out to me and ask me questions, you go through our website, you go to the contact us form, it sends directly to my email inbox. So I'm very, very easily reached through our website.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Nicholas, thank you for this. Thank you for your honesty, for your fire, for your courage to build something that didn't exist. You're not just helping clients, you are setting a new standard for the entire field. For those listening who do want to know more than just, or for those listening who want to do more than just tick boxes and bill hours, this conversation is your invitation to practice differently. Thank you so much, Nicholas. I really appreciate this conversation. I will edit it and I'll send you clips and all the things for it.
Okay, thank you so much. I've had a really good time having this chat as well. You're a lovely human, Britta.
Well, likewise. Gosh, I feel so lucky to know you now. I just really champion your work. Good for you. It's definitely needed. Okay, I will be in touch with the clips and whatever. Thank you so much. Okay, bye.